The marble lobby of Hollingsworth Consulting gleamed under designer lighting, all steel and glass and the kind of cold efficiency that made my chest tighten. I clutched the paper bag containing Michael's favorite deli sandwich, roasted turkey, Swiss cheese, no mayo, a small gesture of the wife I was trying to be. A wife who understood the demands of a senior partner. A wife who didn't ask questions. I was 32 years old, standing in this magnificent tower that my sacrifices had helped build, and I had never felt smaller. "I'm here to see Michael Vance," I said to the security guard, mustering brightness I didn't feel. We'd been married 8 years. Lately, it felt like 8 years of drowning. The guard checked his log, then looked up at me. His expression shifted, confusion, then something like uncomfortable recognition. "Ma'am, Mr. Vance's wife is already upstairs. She signed in about an hour ago." He hesitated, glancing at his screen. She's here quite often. Very familiar with the building." The words hit like vertigo. The lobby tilted slightly. "I see," I managed, my voice steady from years of practice. Years of swallowing things that tasted like poison. "Then I must have missed her on the way in. Just send me up anyway. I'm his actual wife, Ms. Sterling." The guard's face flushed. He nodded quickly, eager to escape the awkwardness. He didn't know that those few sentences had just rearranged my entire world like furniture in a house I was about to burn down. As I stepped into the elevator, my hands stopped shaking. My mind, the analytical part that had never let me down, clicked into focus like a camera lens adjusting to light. The thing about being married to Michael Vance was that you learned to become invisible. Not physically, he needed me visible, needed me at his charity galas and firm dinners, needed me to look the part of the supportive wife. But emotionally, I became air. Useful air. Air that didn't ask questions or point out inconsistencies or dare to feel suspicious about 70-hour work weeks and phone calls taken in other rooms and that particular tone he used when explaining why he was late again. "You're just paranoid, Eliza," he'd say, not unkindly. That was the worst part, the gentleness of the cruelty. "You don't understand the demands of a senior partner. Stop trying to make this about you." I had put my career on hold for his ascension. I was a systems analyst specializing in digital security, one of the best in my field, and I had walked away from a 6-figure salary to manage his life instead. I'd sold stock portfolios to fund his initial investment at the firm. I'd spent weeks building him a private, encrypted home network security system that no one else understood because no one else was as good as I was. Only I knew every backdoor, every line of code, every vulnerability in that beautiful digital fortress. And he called me unsupportive when I questioned his stories. The security guard's words, "She's often here, very cozy," suddenly made brutal sense of every late night, every emotional distance, every moment he'd made me feel crazy for noticing the truth he was hiding. The she was Isabella Reeves, his executive assistant. The woman he'd always dismissed with a wave of his hand. Isabella? Brilliant for organizing files, but completely incompetent at actual analysis. Harmless, really. I should have known then that Michael was a terrible judge of character. Or perhaps too good a manipulator to let his real assessment slip. The 40th floor was all floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture. Michael's office was at the far end, and his assistant's desk sat like a border guard between the world and him. I saw her before she saw me. Isabella Reeves was exactly what Michael's description had promised me not to worry about. Blonde, beautiful in an expensive way, wearing clothes that cost more than my monthly allowance when I'd actually had an allowance. She sat in the plush visitor's chair with the kind of comfort that came from belonging. She looked up, and her entire body stiffened. For just a moment, a fraction of a second, I saw real fear in her eyes. Then she recovered, her face shifting into a smile that was all pity and condescension. "Oh, Eliza. I didn't know you were visiting. Michael is in a crucial meeting right now." She stood, positioning herself between me and his office door. The body language was territorial, almost animalistic. She was protecting her territory. I smiled back at her, the smile I'd perfected over years of board dinners and charity functions. The smile that never reached my eyes. "That's fine, Isabella. I just wanted to drop off his lunch." I held up the paper bag. Tell him I stopped by. As I handed her the bag, I let my arm drift forward just slightly. Just enough that when she reached out to take it, my shoulder bumped her arm with the kind of careless grace that looked entirely accidental. The small, ornate porcelain mug sitting on her desk, a gift from Michael, I noted absently, crashed to the floor. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." Isabella gasped, scrambling to pick up the pieces. "I'm so clumsy." I wasn't listening. While she was on her hands and knees, apologizing profusely, my eyes caught what she'd been trying to hide, a half-opened file folder on her desk, containing what was clearly a high-level client financial report. The kind of document that should never, ever be handled by an assistant, competent or otherwise. But it was the data inside that made my breath catch. Client names. Projected asset liquidation dates. Wire transfer routing information that made no sense whatsoever for a consulting firm's normal operations. Everything Michael had ever told me about classified information suddenly felt like a lie wrapped in a lie. I left before Isabella could look up, before Michael could emerge from his crucial meeting and see the understanding blooming across my face. I went home and I began to hunt. My office at home was small but obsessively organized, a space that was entirely mine. The secure backdoor I'd built into Michael's home network security system years ago existed for one reason: I'd insisted on a failsafe. A way to remotely access the system if anything ever went wrong with the hardware. Michael had never asked why I needed access. He'd never asked much of anything, really. It took me 15 minutes to navigate past the corporate firewalls that Michael believed were so sophisticated, so unbreakable. I moved through his encrypted work laptop like I was reading a book I'd written myself. Because in some sense, I'd learned his patterns years ago, understood his preferences in coding, his laziness about updating passwords. 20 minutes in, I found her files. At first, I thought I was looking at normal business correspondence. Text messages between Michael and Isabella discussing client accounts. Emails about IT vendor costs that seemed oddly inflated. But then I went deeper, following the digital breadcrumbs like Hansel and Gretel, and the picture emerged in high, terrible resolution. The messages weren't just flirtation. They were instruction. Isabella wasn't just an assistant. She was a conductor, orchestrating a complex symphony of theft and money laundering that would have impressed me if it hadn't made me want to vomit. And Michael? Michael had signed every document. His digital signature was on every fraudulent wire transfer. But what made my blood run cold was the blackmail. Explicit photos. Messages that were intimate and damning. Videos of Michael and Isabella together, labeled carefully in his files as security setup documentation. Isabella had turned his own infidelity into leverage, and Michael, brilliant, arrogant Michael, had signed away the firm's future trying to appease a woman who was systematically draining it. I sat back in my chair, my hands steady, my mind already 3 moves ahead of the board game that was about to unfold. I wasn't looking at an affair anymore. I was looking at a conspiracy that would destroy a $100 million firm. And Michael was going to take the fall for it. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of cold, analytical rage. I compiled every piece of evidence, every illegal transfer, every stolen client name, every falsified invoice. I created spreadsheets that would make an auditor weep. I traced the Cayman Islands account back to its source and found $8 million flowing through it like a river. $8 million. This wasn't small-time fraud. This wasn't a mid-level employee cutting corners. This was corporate espionage on a scale that would require federal investigation, that would mean prison time for everyone involved. I needed to be careful. I needed to be brilliant. I called Michael on the 3rd day and let myself cry. Real tears, or close enough, about how much I missed him, how much we needed to reconnect, how maybe we should try therapy. He was so easily seduced by the idea of him helping me, of being the strong one in our relationship for once. "See, Eliza? I'm trying," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I'll call a therapist tomorrow. You need to stop being so suspicious. You're making yourself crazy." I smiled into the phone and told him I loved him. While he was in his therapy session the next day, I sent an anonymous message to Mr. Albright, the firm's non-executive chairman of the board. I'd researched him carefully. A man known for his obsessive commitment to corporate ethics, for firing 3 executives in the last 5 years for regulatory violations. The message was simple, professional, coded, proprietary client data breach and compliance failure. Check IT vendor invoices for Project Chimera. Level 5 priority. I sent it from an encrypted service that would be impossible to trace. Then I waited. The internal audit began 48 hours later. Michael called me in a panic. "It's insane," he said, his voice tight. "Someone's convinced Albright that there's a security breach. It's obviously that rival firm trying to sabotage us. I've never seen anything so." I soothed him. I told him everything would be fine. I watched from my hidden vantage point as the firm's internal security team began their investigation, as they dug through files, as they slowly, inexorably, began to close in on Isabella's encrypted folder. And I watched Isabella realize what was happening. I had remote access to her desktop, a gift from the fact that she used the same pathetic password for her work computer that I'd seen her using for years. Baby Girl 1, variations thereof. I watched her face go pale when the first security notice came through. I watched her fingers fly across her keyboard as she made her move. She started transferring files. Large files. Encrypted files that she thought would be impossible to crack. She'd created an encryption algorithm, layering multiple systems, using coding that would have impressed me if I hadn't recognized it instantly. Because it was my algorithm. Not the one she'd stolen from Michael's home network. Though yes, she'd done that too, accessing it through the system I'd built for him, the vulnerabilities I'd never told him about because I'd wanted insurance in a marriage where I was slowly being erased. No, this was something older. Something I'd created in graduate school and never published, never sold, never shared. A proprietary system that only 2 people in the world understood, me, its creator, and somehow, impossibly, Isabella. My hands actually trembled as I realized what that meant. She'd stolen more than just access. She'd stolen my intellectual property. She'd reverse-engineered something I'd spent 3 years perfecting. She thought it was unbreakable. She was wrong. The firm's audit team hit the encryption wall within a week. They couldn't crack it. The board was panicking. Michael was volunteering to help them, secretly pushing them to delete the folder, to label it corrupted. He had no idea that his beloved Isabella had already thrown him under the bus, had sent anonymous tips to the legal department hinting that he was the one orchestrating the data theft. The firm was on the verge of collapse, frozen in place by a single locked folder that contained the key to everything. And that key, unknowingly, belonged to me. I requested a meeting with Mr. Albright. When I walked into his office at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, I wasn't Michael's wife. I was Eliza Sterling, systems analyst, federal cyber compliance consultant in waiting. I was wearing a sharp charcoal suit and carrying a laptop that contained the digital architecture of my life's work. "Mr. Albright, I'm here about your security breach," I said, and I watched his face shift from skeptical to arrested. I showed him the evidence in clear, unemotional terms. The data theft. The money laundering. The names and amounts. The offshore accounts. Everything laid out with the precision of someone who'd spent her life speaking the language of code and data. "How do you know all of this?" he asked quietly. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "I know the system better than anyone on your payroll. I wrote parts of it." 50 minutes later, I was on an emergency contract with Hollingsworth Consulting, hired as a federal cyber compliance consultant to crack the encryption and bypass the internal team. My condition was non-negotiable. Complete anonymity until the job was finished. Reporting only to Albright and the General Counsel. I was being paid handsomely by my husband's firm to expose his crimes. The poetry of it was almost too perfect. Michael and Isabella had planned their final move with the arrogance of criminals who'd gotten away with everything so far. They were going to use the stolen client data to secure the firm's biggest deal yet, a presentation to 17 major investors, a deal worth $40 million. It was the perfect moment. It was the only moment that mattered. I worked for 72 hours straight, not just decrypting Isabella's encrypted folder, but building an irrefutable case. I compiled the texts, the transactions, the financial transfers. I created a presentation within a presentation, a digital truth bomb that would detonate in the middle of their lies. And then I added something personal. A screenshot of the security log from the day I'd come to his office with a sandwich. The day the guard had told me Michael's wife was upstairs. The entry showing Isabella Reeves signing in as Michael Vance's wife. Proof, in the firm's own system, of her deception. On the morning of the presentation, I dressed carefully. Sharp black suit. Diamond earrings that my mother had given me, real ones, the kind that caught light like truth. I met with the firm's general counsel in a private anteroom and handed him a guarded, encrypted drive. "Everything is on here," I said. "It will open automatically during the presentation." I walked into that boardroom just as Isabella was beginning her spiel, her blonde hair catching the light, her smile confident and predatory. The board members were leaning forward, interested. $40 million was hard to ignore. Michael was in the corner, looking bored in the way he got when he thought he'd already won. He saw me come through the door, and his entire body went rigid. I didn't look at him. I walked to the front of the room, carrying my laptop like a weapon, and Isabella's smile flickered. "Security! Get her out of here!" She started to shout, but Mr. Albright stood up, his hand raised. "No," he said quietly. "Let her speak." I connected my laptop to the projector. "I am Eliza Sterling, Systems Analyst and Federal Cyber Compliance Consultant. There is an active, extensive security breach in progress." Then I clicked the button. The first image that flashed across the screen was the encrypted folder, suddenly, impossibly unlocked, Isabella's fraudulent client data. Then came the transaction logs. Every wire transfer. Every signature. Michael's name on every single one. Isabella's alongside his, like partners in crime, which of course they were. The room had gone absolutely silent. "This data represents $8 million in client funds liquidated and transferred through offshore accounts disguised as IT vendor costs," I said, my voice steady and professional. The encryption was sophisticated, but ultimately designed by code that was stolen from private security systems. Code that I wrote. I clicked again. The security log appeared, Isabella Reeves, signing in as Michael Vance's wife, 17 times over the last 6 months. I saw Albright's jaw tighten. I saw the board members look at each other in shock and then at Michael with cold contempt. The affair between Mr. Vance and Ms. Reeves appears to be central to a blackmail scheme, wherein Ms. Reeves leveraged explicit material to coerce Mr. Vance into approving fraudulent transactions. The photographs flashed across the screen, carefully selected, damning, undeniable. Isabella started screaming. Profanities. Accusations. She pointed at Michael like a cornered animal. He was in on it. He knew everything. He wanted this. 2 security officers, positioned by Albright beforehand, moved forward. One approached Isabella. One approached Michael. "No, wait," Michael said, standing up so quickly his chair fell backward. "This is a misunderstanding. Eliza, what are you?" "I'm done," I said simply. As they cuffed Isabella, she fought and screamed like a woman who'd finally realized the game was over. Michael didn't fight. He simply sat down in his fallen chair, his face going gray as he understood what had just happened. The board voted to terminate him effective immediately, pending the investigation. 41 minutes later, the FBI arrived with a warrant for both Michael's and Isabella's arrests. I finished my contract with Hollingsworth Consulting exactly as agreed. I delivered the complete evidence package to the FBI. I testified to federal investigators about Michael's complicity, about the blackmail, about the sophisticated money laundering scheme. And I served Michael with divorce papers while he was in federal custody awaiting trial. My legal team was exceptional. Michael's assets, all of them, became part of the settlement. The house we'd bought together with my money. His investment portfolio. His retirement accounts. Everything calculated, itemized, delivered to me with the precision of a final audit. The settlement exceeded what I would have received in a standard divorce by $2 million. Michael took a plea deal. 5 years in federal prison for his role in the conspiracy. Isabella got 7 years and additional charges related to the data theft of my proprietary algorithm, a crime I personally pressed charges for. 3 months after the arrest, I was contacted by a venture capital firm. They'd heard about the encryption algorithm Isabella had stolen, the one I'd cracked. They wanted to invest in a cybersecurity company based on my intellectual property, my patents, my genius. I named the company Fortress Sterling, and I took their investment. 6 months into my new venture, I received a letter from federal prison. Michael's handwriting was shaky, uncertain, the handwriting of a man who'd lost everything he thought mattered. "I don't understand how you did it," he wrote. "How you stayed so calm. How you planned everything so carefully. Sometimes I think you were never really my wife at all. I think I married a woman I never knew existed." He was right. I had never been his wife. Not truly. I had been an architect, a strategist, a woman who was so good at understanding systems that I'd finally understood the system of my own life. I was a brilliant systems analyst who saved a major corporation from financial collapse. I was a woman who'd transformed her betrayal into her salvation. I was no longer invisible. I never would be again. The penthouse office overlooked the city from 42 stories up. Fortress Sterling had already secured contracts with 17 Fortune 500 companies. My face had appeared on the cover of Wired magazine with the headline, "The Woman Who Cracked the Code." I was 33 years old, building the empire I'd always been capable of building, unshackled from the man who'd spent 8 years telling me I was paranoid, unsupportive, and crazy for seeing truths he was desperately hiding. The security guard at the lobby of my new office building smiled at me as I walked through. "Good morning, Miss Sterling." "Good morning," I replied. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I smiled back like I meant it. If you've made it this far, you understand, respect is non-negotiable. My worth wasn't defined by Michael's gaslighting or his girlfriend being mistaken for his cozy wife. My story proves that silence can be a weapon, and patience, the patience to use my systems analyst skills, can be absolute power. If this resonated with you, if a narcissistic partner has labeled you paranoid to hide their crimes, tell them this: your silence doesn't make you weak. Your boundaries don't make you difficult. Your survival makes you extraordinary. Never let their arrogance hide your professional genius. The revolution happens when you decide to write your own ending. They thought I was just a wife. I became the cyber compliance consultant who exposed their money laundering and saw them arrested. Share your story below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.